everybody, and welcome to Boston Balling. I'm your host, Gabby Hurlbut. Absolutely beautiful weather outside. Springtime is here. It's now baseball season. Super exciting. Certain teams in Boston that went down 3-2 in a series last night are not going to be talked about at the moment because it is a very frustrating time for us as a fan base, and that is definitely a big conversation for another day. So I figured we would talk about not that certain team right now that is not to be named at the moment, and talk about other teams in the New England area that we enjoy, the New England Patriots. So I'm excited to bring you all another episode of the show. I have a guest with me today who covers the Patriots firsthand for NBC Sports Boston, knows the ins and outs of the team, what's going on, all the moves of Phil Perry. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Gabby, outside of that team that shall not be named,
Yeah.
breaking my heart. So outside of that, I'm fine. We've picked up the pieces and we're going to try to have a day here.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those things where I'm choosing to try to remain positive about tomorrow night's game, but it's definitely not looking the best.
I give you a lot of credit for at least being in that space, that headspace, because I am there's nothing about me that wants to be positive when it comes to that team right now. We'll try. By the end of the day, and by the time the game comes around, I'll be all in, and I'm sure I'll be picking them to win. I'll be all in, but right now it's the wound is too fresh, Gabby. It's too fresh.
No, it really is, especially after that performance and how they looked in the game too. It was definitely not a fun one to watch at all.
It's it just brings me back to football is what it does, because it's like, okay, well, I'm just going to choose not to focus on this. How can I tweak my 53 man roster projection or whatever, well, it's a good time of year to be thinking about football because there's not that much that's really pressing. So we're starting to think about spring workouts and how the rookies are going to fit in and things like that. So it's sort of a laid back time of year. Nothing to be negative about, really. It feels like when it comes to football, no matter who your team is.
Yeah, it's true. This is not the time of year to be negative about football. So if other teams are giving us negativity, why not think about something that's more exciting?
Exactly. That's where I'm at right now.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you hopping on here with me to just chat with me a little bit. I definitely do want to hear a little bit more about you and your career path and how you ended up in your position now.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think I've had a unique career path where I got into this world, Gabby, this sports media universe, at an interesting time where media was really changing drastically, and it's still changing pretty drastically, and really quickly. But I graduated from Georgetown in 2008 and wrote for the school paper there and really liked it and always loved sports. Wasn't athletic enough to play anything at Georgetown, but wanted to stay close to it. So really liked my time working on the school paper and said, let's just try to keep it going. And went and worked for a daily paper in New Hampshire, a small daily paper, where, I was for a time, one man sports section. So I'm taking pictures and I'm writing all the articles, and it's mostly high school sports, and I'm really liking it. But it's 2008 and the financial crisis is what it is. And that small daily paper goes bankrupt. I lose
Wow.
my job. I go back home. And I'm sort of picking up the pieces. I'm trying to figure out what's next. And at that point, I just started freelancing at a lot of places, including the Milton Times. I grew up in Milton, Massachusetts. So I was back at home and I was working at the local paper. I was selling ads because they needed an ad salesperson. But when they had space, they let me write. And so that was one outlet that I could work for. I pitched a bunch of stories to a bunch of different places. I luckily caught on with the Boston Globe, one of their local sections, and was able to do a bunch of high school and college sports stuff for them for a time. And then NBC, which was at the time Comcast Sportsnet, started a website. They just started their sports station, which had been Fox Sportsnet and had been Sports Channel, been a million different things for a long time. Even when I was growing up, I remember watching it. And they had just started their website and they needed editors. And I could edit, I could copy edit. Again, I was editing at the paper. A lot of times I was editing my own stuff right out of college, which is, I'm not sure how that's supposed to work. But they needed editors and they needed night editors. So I was the 6 p.m. to 2 a.m. night editor for csnne.com, Comcast Sportsnet New England. And that was my job. And I was technically a freelancer for a while, but I was, basically every night, 5 nights a week. And I actually was liking that schedule. Again, I was still pretty early out of college. This was probably, I started 2010. And, no wife, no kids, I can work late at night and I can work during the day. So I was doing some of my freelance stuff during normal waking hours. And then I'd roll into my night job, and I didn't feel like I needed much sleep. Not nearly as much as I do now. So it was a lot of fun. I was busy, still trying to kind of get a toehold in a job that I really wanted. I didn't want to be the night editor for the website forever, but it got me in the door. And eventually what happened, to make a long story endless, eventually what happened was Tom Curran came into the office one day. Tom Curran, funny enough, actually worked at the same daily paper in New Hampshire that I did about 20 years before I did. So he had maybe kind of taken a liking to me because he kind of understood what that life was like. He came in one day and said, "Hey, the Globe's got, 4 people down at Gillette Stadium every day, and the Herald's got 4 people down at Gillette Stadium every day. And, why can't we it's just me right now. I need some help." And I was just happened to be sitting there. I was like, "Hey, I'll go," and I actually started out, we had a great boss. The late, great Art Martone was amazing and basically said, "Hey, I can't pay you to go, but if you want to go, we'll make sure you can get a press pass on Fridays. You can cover practice on Fridays, and you can write whatever you want to write, and you'll have access to the locker room, and you can talk to the guys." And that was like gold to me, even though that was a day. I had Fridays and Saturdays off. So this is one of my days off, but I'd go down to Gillette Stadium on Fridays. And that was my one time to be able to go in the locker room. And then they let me start covering the home games. And then the practice days kind of grew. And eventually in 2014, that was when I started covering the team full time. And my job here has changed a million different ways since then. But that was sort of my lead up to NBC and getting the job that I got. Sort of, a lot of lucky breaks, Gabby. A lot of late nights mixed in there too. But sort of, again, I didn't have one of these, I think a lot of people, and listen, there's a million different ways that are legitimate routes to go and do it. I didn't have the internship into the job route that I think some people have. But and I think at the time I probably would have said, "Oh man, I really, those people have it pretty good. Those people are lucky," but I look at it now and I say, I benefited in a massive way of being in the right place at the right time for them to start their website when they started it, because it wasn't a huge operation. They didn't have a million jobs that were just going out to, the world. When they began, it was pretty small, and that meant a lot of opportunity for me and a lot of responsibility early on for me. And I'm so lucky that happened and that I timed it the way I timed it. So, maybe not such great timing graduating at the height of an economic crisis here in our country. But I won't do the everything happens for a reason, Gabby, because I don't know, what the cosmos has planned for any of us. But if that paper hadn't gone bankrupt in New Hampshire, I might still be there, and not that it was a terrible life, but it wasn't where I wanted to be forever. And now I'm really lucky. I feel like I've got a job that I would consider a dream job, as a kid growing up here in the area. This would have made young Phil pretty happy to be able to cover the Patriots and be on NBC Sports Boston the way I am right now.
Yeah, and obviously if you love these teams and these are the teams that you grew up being a fan of too, what's better than being able to cover one of those teams and call it your everyday job?
Yeah, I mean, it's really special, and especially with this particular team, the Patriots, And I'm again very blessed. I get to talk about the Celtics on TV. I get to talk about the Red Sox on TV. I get to talk about the Bruins, all teams that I rooted for growing up. But the team that I'm covering really on a daily basis is the Patriots, and rooted for the Patriots and rooted for Tom Brady and rooted for Bill Belichick. And I have to be open about that. Like I always tell people, like when it comes to being a good reporter, I think it's really important that you acknowledge who you are, truly who you are, and your own biases and whatever comes with who you are, especially in sports, And so I understand that I was a massive Patriots fan, and Gabby, if I had been a massive Celtics fan, which I was, massive Celtics fan growing up, and then went to cover the team, in call it 2014 when I started full-time covering the Patriots, or 2011 when I really started getting into the mix with the Patriots. If it was the Celtics regime there in 2011 would have been very, very different from the one that I watched when I was a eighth grader, right? Or a freshman in high school. The Patriots, not so much. Same quarterback, same head coach, same owner. You know what I mean? So it's like I rooted for all these guys. It wasn't just the jersey or the team or the going to the stadium growing up. These were people that I was really invested in their success, and now I have to go as a reporter and cover them and be fair and call it like I see it, and try really hard not to wear the fan rose-colored glasses, because that's my job. For the readers, for our audience, for our listeners, they don't want to, I shouldn't say that. They come to us because we are at our core, we're reporters, and we want to get it right, and we want to get to the truth. There's fan podcasts out there which do unbelievably well. That's not really who I am. That's not what my job pays me to do. My job pays me to go and be in the press conferences and ask real questions, and go into the locker room and ask real questions, and find out the things that we think our audience wants us to find out for them. We're lucky. We get these credentials. I usually got one on me. I don't have one on me right now, Gabby, but like these things are incredibly valuable. It allows me to go somewhere where most fans can't. And so how would they want me to use that access that I get? That was growing up the way I grew up and rooting for them the way that I did. And then being asked to cover the team the way that I am now took some time for me to really get used to that and acknowledge that bias and still try to do my job and do it the right way. So it's a dream. There's no question. Like I get to be on the Gillette Stadium turf, I don't know, 10 minutes before kickoff, and I'm on live TV and I'm talking about the team that, that I grew up watching and that my family loves, right? That's the other thing. It's like, okay, now I have this job and I have to approach this team a little bit differently. I can't be fanboy Phil anymore. Like I have to, do my job, right? Do what I'm paid to do. But my parents still love this team. My sisters and my friends, they still love this team. My wife still loves this team. Her family loves the team too. And so there might be instances where, and God bless my parents, they would never do this, but from my friends for sure, why you got to give Bill a hard time in the press conference? What do you know? I know you, Perry. You don't know a damn thing about football. You didn't even know. I would be the guy in high school, Gabby. I played football. But I would be the guy in the huddle. I readily admit this now, and my friends will tell you, I was the guy in the huddle who did not understand the play call. And now I'm the guy who has to criticize people if they don't understand the immensely complicated Patriots playbook. I wouldn't know what to do. I'd have to go to my quarterback at the end of his, long rambling play call and say, okay, so what am I supposed to do? And he would have to do a special, explanation just for me. So it's a really interesting thing to try to navigate, to be from here and cover the team here and try to do it well.
Yeah, it's definitely probably hard too when they're struggling or going through a tough time, because even obviously, this whole transition since Brady leaving in general has been tough for the Patriots because we were so used to constant success during the Brady Belichick era and just constantly knowing the Patriots were going to be a contending team that consistently was a team that was in the Super Bowl conversation. And then they're going through a transition period of, really trying to establish themselves with a new quarterback, which is something that every team has gone through. But Patriots fans just kind of stopped getting used to that and forgot that that exists as a real thing because of how long Brady and Belichick were here for. So during that transition, it's probably hard to cover the team when they're struggling too, because you still internally in your heart are a fan of the team and you want to see them succeed, but you have to point out those things that are not going well and not working for the team.
Well, yeah, and I would say this too, Gabby. It's even though I'm not invested in their success emotionally the way that I used to be, we all in the media space are invested in their success, right? It's better for us business wise. It's better for the security of my job and many others. I'm in a beautiful new building here in Needham. This is where our new studios are. We share them with NBC 10 and we share them with Telemundo and NECN. And and I'm not saying that this building wouldn't be here if not for the Patriots and all the success that they had, but I'm not sure we'd have all the shows that we have and the number of people that we have working for us at NBC Sports Boston. Like the way this town kind of shifted in terms of the success that it experienced sports wise began with the Patriots, and that led to a boom in terms of the businesses that sort of make up that ecosystem around these teams that have had all this success. And we're part of that ecosystem. So like, I have to remind myself all the time, like, don't get it twisted. Like, yeah, you might not be rooting for them. And there's no way, like, there's no rooting in the press. Like, that's a real thing. Like, and I want to be able to do my job well and do it fairly. And so that's not a part of my emotional calculus, but it is better for me and for my business if the team does well. And you'll even hear, some of the most quote unquote negative folks in our industry, Felger and Maz will say this all the time. They'll get through ripping the Patriots for 20 minutes and say, but it's better for us if they do well. So we really hope that, come on guys, like pick it up. And I think the other thing that's interesting about like this transition time and covering them now is that the expectations for fans have changed, Gabby, right? Like, so you will of course have your section of the fan base that says, hey, what more does this franchise need to do for me? They won 6 championships. They brought me immense joy in my life. And so however long it takes them to get back on track, fine with me. That's only a section of the fan base, I would say, though. And I would say there's a larger portion of the fan base that has really critical questions about the direction of the team and why it's, performing the way it's performing and why it's not better. And what's interesting about that, Gabby, is the reason that these fans know as much as they do about football is because the Patriots have been as good as they've been. And so people have invested their time. They've learned more about the sport. They've learned more about the league. They've learned more about how other teams maybe transition away from star quarterbacks. And so now they have questions. Whereas if the team sucked for 20 years and nobody was paying attention or only half paying attention, only watching the games on Sunday and not investing any of their other time during the week, would they be really as critical as they are now? Like, they've seen what good football looks like. They've understood how a successful franchise operates. And so when the Patriots don't meet their own lofty standards in those regards, then people have questions. And so that's sort of where we have to fill in. Okay, what are those questions? Why? How do we find out, why things are going the way they're going? That's where we use that credential and try to get answers.
Yeah, because it's good for us from a fan standpoint to be wondering those things and then have you guys go and be like, okay, we're gonna figure this out for you, and then just relay the information back to us. Because obviously people on Twitter have conversations about like, why did Belichick do this or why are they doing this and not that? Those are constant conversations that people are having during the season and in the off season. The draft is a good example too. Why did they really do, focus more on a defensive heavy draft when we felt like there were other areas that they needed to address too? Those types of questions are things that you can get answered directly from those sources as to the thought process.
That's the idea, right? And you'll always have people again who say, "Hey, how dare you ask Bill Belichick, why he's playing Bailey Zappi on Monday Night Football against the Bears?" But then you'll get the other people who say, why don't you guys criticize Bill more? Look at his record without Tom Brady, or, like I tweeted something, quote unquote negative about the team that shall not be named last night at the end of the game. And, immediately get a response. Oh yeah, classic football guy who's afraid to criticize Bill Belichick, but is willing to rip another team in town. And it's like, okay, I guess I must be doing my job well, because if I'm getting yelled at by half the people say I don't rip them enough, and the other half say I rip them too much, then I must be right down the middle, and I must be as fair can be, which is, essentially what we're going for. I'm not, trying to be over the top in one way or another on either side of it. It's really about, using your eyes, explaining to people again with that pass, what you can see, what you can hear, that most people can't, and providing that to your audience. But then there's that other part about asking the questions that you think people want to know. And so, hey, sometimes social media is such a part of all of our lives now. It's hard to ignore. I won't sit here and say that I'm polling the fans and saying, hey, what should I ask Bill Belichick today? But it's hard to ignore, when you're getting peppered after a game about a certain play or a certain topic, or you got to ask Bill Belichick about this. It's hard to ignore that stuff. And a lot of times it syncs up with what you're already thinking about, what's already going through your head. I know I need to ask him about X, Y, and Z. But I've had a ton of great, impactful interactions on social media with fans who I really respect, who are really knowledgeable, who communicate in a, number one, which sometimes this is hard to find on social media, respectful way, but also in such a way that you can tell they're engaged and they want to hear, your opinion, but they clearly have well-founded, well-thought-out ideas themselves. And that's it has helped me cover this team. I really believe that, Gabby. So there's always that sort of back and forth with, trying to be in tune with what the fans are thinking, and then trying to adjust your approach on that day, whatever day it is. Might be a game day, might be a locker room day, might be an off day, might be a draft day, and try to kind of gear your coverage down that same road.
Yeah, it's good to be alert to what fans are talking about on social media too. Twitter, especially when there's a huge community of people that are relying really heavily on Twitter to get that information about the team. So you want to be able to be in tune to the types of questions that they're asking and the types of information that they're interested in learning more about or finding out, because I feel like that just makes you better at doing what you're doing too, because ultimately they love this team and they're invested. So why not deliver what they want to hear?
Definitely. And listen, there are other times where you've got to be the one to drill down and find a unique and new angle that helps your audience either learn more about, or enjoy to a greater degree, or feel in a stronger way, whether it's positive or negative, about their team. And so, hopefully that happens relatively often, where, unlike, I would say, the average fan, as passionate as they are, this is my full-time job, Gabby. So like, I should be spending more time on this team than anybody else. And I know that, like, and we're thankful for it. Believe me, the passion of the fan base for the Patriots and these other teams is unbelievable.
Oh yeah.
But I should be able to come up with, hey, why hasn't this question been asked? And it might not be a thing that a single person on Twitter that follows me at least has thought of. And then I can bring it to the table. And then now all of a sudden we've got a unique story idea, or a unique thought that improves the experience of following that team for our listeners or for our viewers.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes a lot of sense, and I feel like it's really good to just be aware of all of that and be able to come up with different and unique questions to ask. And I feel like obviously Belichick is a tough guy to get answers from, especially in his press conferences and things that I've seen. Just being able to ask him questions and really get a lot of detail from him, because he's not a very detailed type of guy. So I could imagine that's probably hard to get answers from him that you're looking for a lot of times when you're asking questions of him.
Yeah, and you know what, Gabby? I would say the vast majority of times, you're not necessarily looking for a specific answer. You're looking for some sort of explanation for sure, but you're not sure how he's going to go now. I find this to be especially true with Bill Belichick. You know, with other coaches, even sometimes other coaches on the staff, you probably understand. You ask a question a certain way, that person's going to give you a certain amount of. Josh McDaniels was always really accommodating for us in the media, but Josh could be really long-winded almost no matter what the question was. So he would find a way to, whether he was trying to filibuster so he wouldn't have to answer that many questions or what, Gabby, I'm not sure. But you understood what the tone would be and about how long it would take and where it might go. With Bill, it could be a one-word answer. It could be a no-word answer. It could just be a look, and he moves on to the next one. Or you could get a 3,000-word dissertation on draft day decisions or the evolution of the fullback or when place kickers became part of the active roster calculation in the NFL. Like, you'd be amazed at times at the level of detail he's willing to go into. And I've been really fortunate over the years to be able to meet with him even away from those press conference settings and talk to him about things, whether it's in his past. I did a long story on a coach named Wayne Harden who coached at Navy while Bill Belichick was growing up. And Bill Belichick has long been thought of as a risk taker in game in terms of team building. Because he believes in it, and he credits Wayne Harden with being sort of that influence in his life. And we had a tremendous, really long discussion. I was able to talk to Harden himself about Bill Belichick and the relationship they have. So, like, you never know what you're going to get from Bill, which is part of the reason why it's such an entertaining team to cover.
Yeah, it keeps you on your toes for sure because you're like, I wonder how he's going to go about this question, which probably makes it a lot more interesting.
Yeah, and you know what? Like, early in my career, Gabby, again, I would say, again, from here, grew up in Milton, went to BC High, like went to my buddies' houses and watched all these games. Like, early on, I'm sitting there and boy, and I know how Bill can be in press conferences as a fan, and I'm trying to come up with something that's going to get something out of him, and that could be stressful. Now it's really not as much. I feel like I've got a pretty good plan. Every time I go into a press conference, I want to have some kind of plan and some sort of direction I want to go with it based on the news of the day or based on whatever other, storylines I might be trying to think of for down the line. And the stress isn't there in the same way, but there's just this understanding of no matter what I ask here today, there is a small percentage chance that I just get a look, a grunt, or a chuckle, and somebody and his eyes going to somebody else. And if that happens, like if that had happened the first day I covered the team, Gabby, I'd probably be devastated. I'd probably be nervous about what my bosses are going to think, or if they're going to let me down here again, or if Bill's ever going to answer a question that I have for him. But now, if it happens now, I get it. It's part of the deal. And I'll shrug my shoulders and I'll come back to the next day's press conference and I'll ask something else. and he might give me that 3,000-word dissertation that I'm not expecting. That's happened before. I'm sitting there and saying, boy, is Bill ever going to talk to me again? And,
Yeah.
for the most part, I think, he has a reputation, and I think it's well earned in some cases as being, like a real grudge holder.
Yeah.
And I think that's true sometimes in media. I really think for the vast majority of us in the media, he ain't thinking about us all that much. And so, like, for me to sit there and think, oh, well, Bill, was Bill ever going to say anything to me ever again? Like, Bill probably didn't think twice about it, from the moment the words, the one word answer was out of his mouth. Like, and I've actually brought it up to him before, when you're on the road with any team, the NFL, less so than others that are on the road more often. But, I've been on the road and there have been instances where it just so happens like you're at the same hotel as the team and you don't know that that's going to happen when it happens, but then you show up and the team's there. And, I've run into Bill Belichick before and said things like, hey, just so you know, I wasn't trying to back in a corner, or I wasn't trying to, blindside you with a question the way I asked it. What'd you think about how I asked it? And he'll say something to the effect of, Gabby, like, wait, which question are you talking about now? And I'm sitting there thinking that, oh, this really bothered him and he's going to never forget this one. And I'm sitting there talking to him and he's like, what are you talking about? I honestly have no idea what you're talking about. And I'm sitting there like, oh, this has been kind of eating me up the last couple of days because I thought I sounded like a jackass. And you're telling me that, like, you haven't thought about it since then. So, okay. So that makes sense. So that's just who he is. And listen, very lucky. I know some people think, especially this past season, that, I'm in there to throw stones or to rattle cages or whatever. It's really not the case. I'm just down there I gotta ask something, right? Like my bosses wouldn't be very happy with me if I just, went to every press conference and sat on my hands. And so we're trying to do our job. And I think Bill understands, he's been doing this a long time, obviously. So he understands that we have a job to do. And the vast majority of the time, he doesn't care what we're asking. And if he answers a certain way in a press conference, it doesn't mean he's going to talk to you a certain way 5 minutes later. So, so that's part of the fun.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. He's certainly an interesting guy for sure, just from everything I've seen on him. But speaking of Bill, he has kind of had a pretty bad rap when it comes to his drafting. He's gotten a lot of criticism from people on social media in regards to the people that he drafts or just what he prioritizes in drafts. And I think obviously, he's hit on draft picks and there's other draft picks that he very much has not hit on. And obviously, the draft in general is tough because you don't really know how anybody's going to pan out in the NFL when they get drafted. There's no way to know that for sure. Or, the environment they're in might not be the best environment for that player. Obviously, going into the draft, I was thinking more offense. He was going to address certain positions like wide receiver, maybe offensive line, were the two positions primarily that I was looking at that the team needed the most help in. He seemed to want to really focus on defense and honing his defense because, they're in a tough division. Every team in this division is competitive. So it's obviously important to have a strong defense. I mean, he's a defensive minded guy. They consistently do have a strong defense. Were you surprised at all by the fact that he prioritized primarily defense in this draft?
So I was a little surprised. I won't say I was hugely surprised, Gabby, and here's why. Talking to people both with the Patriots and across the league. That's another interesting thing about covering this league now is when they've had success, it means that a lot of the people that were here end up getting hired other places. And so like now it's like there's this wide web of people that have been here in Foxborough that are now strewn about. Talk to any of them and they all would tell you that this was not a great top end talent draft on the offensive side. That included quarterbacks. And I know we saw a bunch go in the first round, but Will Levis, for example, we all know, like, was expected to go in the first round, and the league didn't see him as a first-round quarterback. So, weak quarterback class, weak receiver class, weak offensive tackle class. And those are, if you're drafting in the first round, Cole Strange and, the occasional guard in the first round aside, those are the positions, generally speaking, you're looking at in the first round, and they just weren't there in this year's draft class. Even the depth at receiver, which has really been tremendous in recent years. And you find stars in the second round, Deebo Samuel and T. Higgins and DK Metcalf and AJ, but these guys are all second round picks. Like, you should be able to find some talent. Like you think you'd be able to find talent. And maybe that'll end up being true. Maybe we'll all look back at this 2023 draft class and say, man, we really missed there. This class was loaded with talented receivers. And turns out we still can't evaluate them because if we could, like all those names I just mentioned would have been first round picks. They wouldn't have been second round picks. But that's just how this class was viewed, was not a great tackle class, not a great receiver class. And that to me, those were two of the three needs that this Patriots team had going into the draft. And the other was corner, right? Now that was a position that we knew was pretty talented this year. And you knew there were going to be several, at least, first round corners, and there were. So Wasn't surprised that they didn't go offense in the first round. I was surprised Christian Gonzalez fell to them in the first round.
Me too.
And then after that, if you end up missing on the 2 or 3 guys you do think are first or second round worthy at receiver or tackle, and again, I'm not sure the Patriots even had that many with those types of grades. Then you're looking at later in the draft, and now you're looking at your board, Gabby. And I just had a great conversation with Mike Lombardi, who's a longtime, Belichick front office assistant, about how you're not only looking at your draft grades in a vacuum. Okay, this player's better than that player's better than this player, but you're looking at your current roster too, and they're all graded. Every player that's on your roster also has a grade. And you can compare and contrast. It's the same grade, pro and college. It's the same style grade, meaning, it's 1 through 9. A 9 is a Hall of Famer, one of the best all time at his position. A 1 is a reject, doesn't belong in the NFL. But you can look at a receiver in this year's class that you might have graded as a 5.9, right? So not a starter, but somebody who can make the roster and probably won't win or lose a game for you, but maybe someday makes an impact. You could have a receiver graded as a 5.9, but are you going to spend a second round pick on a 5.9 receiver if you feel like the worst receiver on your active roster for 2023 is a 6.0? If Tyquan Thornton to you is their 4th receiver, right? And he's a 6.0, what are you doing taking the 5.9 for? Because who is he replacing? How are you making your team better? So like, those are conversations that happen in the draft room, and honestly, well before the draft, as they're getting ready for draft weekend. You could be looking at tackles, and I would sit there and say, hey, like, I really like this guy from Pitt. I think he could be a starter someday. But if he doesn't have that grade from the Patriots, if he's a 5.3 tackle and Riley Reif is a 5.9, and he's Calvin Anderson is a 6.0, even though one guy's younger, the draft pick is going to be younger, you're probably not going to take the 5.3 because it just doesn't make your team better. Again, we could argue different things, and they did end up taking some receivers in this year's draft, but they took them really late. And by the time you get to 5th, 6th, 7th round, now you're talking about rolling the dice on somebody. Maybe he blows up in training camp, and then you can go from there, and maybe that grade changes. Maybe he's a better player than you graded him. Maybe you missed on the grade. Like I would have said, maybe go for a tackle in the 4th round with that same sort of mindset. Like, okay, we're willing to roll the dice on Kayshon Boutte in the 6th round. Let's be willing to roll the dice on a tackle in the 4th round. What they would say is, sorry, not for us. 4th round, way too valuable pick to be rolling the dice like that, Phil. Good thing you're not a general manager anywhere, buddy. You wouldn't last long. Like that's, like that. And they would probably be right, because if you're rolling the dice with all your 4th round picks, then you miss out on a Shaq Mason, who ends up having a huge role for you and is a great player for you that you got in the 4th round, because you stuck to your board and you said, this guy's got a good grade and he could be a starter for us someday. And yeah, maybe there's a sexy receiver name that's right there too, but we're not sure that guy's ever going to play in the league. This guy's a player, this Shaq Mason kid. And so, that's how you should build a team. And so I give them credit for that. They took fewer offensive, I would say core offensive positions than I thought early in the draft, but they stuck to their board, and I get it. There's a lot of time, weeks, months, over a year, honestly, over a full year, because they've already started on before this draft came and went, Gabby, they already started looking at the 2024 draft class and the guys that they think will be available in 2024, which is crazy. It's mind blowing. But by the time their college scouts get all their grades and everything, that's weeks before the draft even happens. So they're already doing their advanced work on next year. So these grades take over a year to put together. You're not going to sit there on draft weekend and say, I know this guy's graded as a backup, but we could use a starter who's a little bit better than Riley Reif at tackle. Screw it. Let's go with it. It's just not how it's going to work. So, and it's not how it should work either, as much as, me and fans, media and fans, a lot of times, again, like our interests align. Like I would have loved to see them get a receiver early, but the fact of the matter is there just wasn't a guy there, even Jackson Smith and Jigba. It's my understanding that they saw as being worth a middle of the 1st round pick. So, I love it. I find all these conversations interesting. It's why I wanted to talk to Lombardi about like all the, do you go for need? Do you go for best player available? Like it's the grades and the work that goes into those grades. That's usually what trumps just about everything.
Yeah, and I mean Christian Gonzalez, like you said, it was a fantastic pick. I thought he was going to go earlier. So the fact that he fell to the Patriots, you can't pass up on somebody like that at that pick. So in that moment in time, Bill was probably like, this guy I know is going to be able to likely make a quicker impact on this team than any receiver I'd be able to pick right now. And obviously fans were screaming during the draft, why haven't we taken a receiver yet? But I was like, this team does need a true wide receiver one still, because they don't really have that still on this team right now. But I was also saying, are they really going to get that from this draft class right now? Because they need a receiver who's really going to be that guy for Mac to be able to throw the ball to. And you really, it's already taking a risk to rely on somebody from the draft class to begin with, to be held with that responsibility. But with, like you said, the receivers that were available in this draft class in general, were they really going to get somebody that would fill that need immediately from this class? And I really was thinking, no, I don't really think that they will do that. And that's part of the reason why I wasn't as surprised either that they didn't take a receiver earlier on, because I don't know how effective that would have been for them and currently what they're looking for.
You're on it, Gabby, and that's how they felt about it. And I think the two guys they took in the 6th round, to me are interesting picks because they might have, in terms of their physical ability, they might have had as much physical ability as almost anybody that went in this year's draft. The first round receivers that we saw, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Zay Flowers, Quentin Johnston, like these guys are talented dudes for sure. But the Patriots got a couple physically talented guys. I mean, we've seen what Kayshon Boutte could do in the SEC. Now he's a couple years removed from his best performances at that level, and he's dealt with some injury and dealt with some other stuff away from the field. And so, we'll see if it pans out. But if you're just betting on traits, they got guys who have some traits, and I really like Pop Douglas, Demario Douglas, but he's from Liberty and he's small, so like he's got some things you have to contend with there, but he ran a 4.4 and he's got real lower body explosiveness, he had an 11-foot broad jump. Like it's pretty freaky stuff. And so he's somebody who could give you probably a pretty explosive vertical option from the middle of the field. That's something they don't really have right now. So I like what they did at that position, even though it was late, because I think in this draft, outside of Flowers, who I really did like, and I think it would have been a fun story for him to be able to stay at Boston, stay in the area. Obviously, the Patriots don't care about that. They've got a team to build. But for our purposes, Gabby, like it would have been great to see Zay Flowers be able to stay in the area and be like a truly dynamic option for Mac Jones. But maybe they feel like they got somebody whose skill set isn't all that dissimilar in Douglas. But again, he's from Liberty and he's smaller, lower level competition. And so we're not sure how it'll pan out, but 6th round versus 1st round, like that's a trade-off that Bill Belichick obviously was willing to make.
Yeah, I mean, my heart wanted Zay Flowers because I was like, it seems meant to be that he would be a Patriot because, he went to Boston College. He's a Boston guy, so he can stay in the area. He's used to, being around the passionate Boston fan base. So it just seemed like that story was kind of meant to be. And I know a lot of fans felt the same way too, that he was a name that I consistently saw popping up as somebody that people would want to be here. But it's definitely a trade-off because if you take him, you don't get Christian Gonzalez in the 1st round either. So it's definitely a tough gamble to make, but who knows how Zay Flowers is going to be able to really pan out either. And again, like I said before, he is talented and I'm sure he would have been great with the Patriots, but I don't think he still would have filled the need that they really need at wide receiver still.
You're right. That true number one. I don't think he was in the draft, honestly. I guess you could argue maybe Quentin Johnston, because he's got that size and that explosive athleticism, but he's got hands questions. I think he's got real speed questions. Like it's great to be a big body on the outside. And that's sort of, like think of Devontae Parker. Is Devontae Parker a true one? He might have been like for 1 year in his career in Miami. But he's a big body and he can catch the ball down the field. He actually has, I think he's got really good hands. So that, like, if that's what Quentin Johnston is, are you happy with that? Is that your number one moving forward? If he's somebody else, if he's something closer to like DeAndre Hopkins, who caught everything, by the way, and like, so, they're not really the same guy. But if that's what he is, and he's not Devontae Parker, then he is a number one. And so good for the Chargers and good pick. I'm just not sure. There were just, all of these guys had pretty significant questions in terms of, can they be a true top option, which you're right. That's what the Patriots need.
Yeah, and speaking of that top option, obviously, they signed Juju, who to me still is not a true wide receiver one. I think he makes the receiving core better, but I still don't think he's that guy that they are looking for. And I think they're aware of that. I don't think they signed him with the intention of making him that guy. But do you think that they do make a move for somebody before the season starts? Do you think that they trade for somebody? Or do you think that they're going to try to roll with what they have and see if they can, make it work with Mac Jones?
I think they would be open to acquiring somebody who is closer to a real go-to option and just have that guy that's a difference maker for you in critical situations. Third down. Who are we going to on third down? Especially after you lost Jacoby Myers, Gabby. And I know people look at Juju as a 1-for-1 sub, and some people view him as an upgrade over Jacoby Myers. I'm not in that camp. I can tell you, I haven't had a single person tell me in Foxborough that they view Juju Smith-Schuster as an upgrade. He was kind of the alternative. He got a little less money. So, the Patriots, I think, kind of dug in on Myers and said, we're only willing to go so far. And, they went with a little bit lesser over 2 years average annual value for Smith-Schuster, who I think does give you something more after the catch than Myers does. But that's only part of playing this position. You got to get open, especially in this offense, and you got to get open quickly. This isn't Kansas City, and hopefully for the Patriots, they don't realize that very quickly with Juju Smith-Schuster, because in Kansas City, you had a quarterback who, and yes, he can do everything. So he can get rid of it quickly too now. But he also has this incredible ability to be able to extend the play and be running around behind the line of scrimmage for 4 or 5 seconds, which allows everybody to uncover. There's not a receiver in the league who can't get open in 4 seconds. That ain't the Patriots. You got to be open in 2 and on time and in the right spot. It's the farthest thing from, because they have to play that way. It's the farthest thing from backyard football. So it's very different systems. It's a player who's dealt with a lot of injury, which, Myers, to his credit, was almost always available. Even though he dealt with stuff, he played through a lot. He did everything they asked in terms of the blocking, which I would assume Juju Smith-Schuster will do as well. But I just think if you're assuming him to be your number one, or to be even like a 1-for-1 sub for Jacoby Myers, I just think you might be disappointed this year. So he's something they needed. They did need an interior presence once Myers signed with the Raiders, but he's not going to be the guy that I don't think that changes the offense for them. The guy I would look at, honestly, Gabby, as a potential matchup problem is Mike Gesicki. Because at least with Gesicki has some speed. He has like real juice athletically. He's still a freaky athlete. And he's somebody you have to account for down the field, which outside of him, I'm not sure who on this roster, like Tyquan Thornton, you do have to account for down the field. I just don't know. He hasn't proven it in such a way, Gabby, that you have to devote like multiple bodies to making sure Tyquan Thornton doesn't beat you down the field. Right now, I think teams are like encouraging the Patriots, say, go ahead. Like, this guy basically averaged 1 catch for 19 yards per game last year. Like, we're not dedicating a free safety over the top of Tyquan Thornton the way you have to for real number ones across Jamar Chase. The Bengals actually have 2 guys, but whether it's Jamar Chase or Tyreek Hill or, your whole defense has to shift to that player. That's not Thornton right now. And I'm not saying it's what Gesicki will be, but at least with Gesicki, it's like, well, if we don't have this guy accounted for, he's going to beat all of our linebackers with his speed. He's much bigger than all our safeties. And if we just let him run down the middle of the field, he's a 25-yard gain waiting to happen. Like he's a unique talent for this team. And so that, to me, it's not Smith-Schuster. It's really Gesicki is the addition they made this offseason that I think could really help their offense reach a different level.
Yeah, I liked that pickup a lot. I think he can do a lot of different things productivity wise for this team right now. And I think that's somebody who, obviously from the tight end tandem standpoint is gonna hopefully work out a lot better too. Because obviously the tight end situation was really unfortunate with how much money they spent on those two tight ends and it just didn't work out. So it's it's good that you have somebody in there who generally I think is going to be an upgrade at that position.
Yeah, and Bill O'Brien in his history, like he knows how to use two tight ends, and didn't just do it in New England; he did it in Houston also. And so like the middle of the field, and do you have it covered? And is that where Mac Jones does his best work? I think it is. They should be, Gabby, they should be a better offense this year. Like there's no doubt in my mind they're going to have a better product offensively. I just wonder if they have improved enough
That's what I wonder
to get to the place where they want to go.
Yeah, I mean, again, like I said before, they're in a tough division. The other teams in their division are very competitive. Obviously, the Jets now too, getting Rodgers is going to be good for their offense too. And they're basically Packers 2.0 now because they keep bringing Aaron Rodgers' former
Right.
teammates over there too. So it'll just be a tough division to be in. So looking at just the other teams in the division, how do you think they should approach the rest of this offseason? They did sign cornerback Tay Hayes, which was kind of interesting to me. But what do you think that they should be doing with the rest of this offseason to really feel like they genuinely can compete with the rest of that division?
I think it's going to be hard to make a move that's going to make them feel that way, or make them feel better about their chances. Usually around this time of year, you're kind of filling out the back end of your roster. You are adding depth to places where you don't feel great about it. Maybe at the moment, the one position, honestly, that I was a little surprised. There's a few positions I'm surprised they didn't really address. I mean, I was surprised they didn't address tight end in the draft. Because it was really deep. It was supposed to be a historically good tight end class, Gabby, and they didn't add a guy.
But they got a pick from the Jets and took a kicker.
Right. I mean, when you got Nick Folk on the roster, I was told before, like, I'd be surprised. One person told me they'd be surprised if the Patriots took a kicker or a punter in this year's draft because they had Nick Folk already, and they had a guy by the name of Corliss Waitman, who's a free agent they signed, who's a punter who, what I've been told is he could probably kick off too if you really needed him to. So Waitman could have been sort of your Jake Bailey sub, and you just stick him on the roster and you keep Nick Folk because he's all reliable and you move forward. What a dummy I am, because not only did they take a kicker, but they took a punter too. So I was wrong on both counts. So like kind of mind-blowing stuff. And then they also took two specialists like later in the draft that are probably only going to play special teams for them in Amir Speed from Michigan State, who's a Georgia transfer, and Bolden, whose first name I can't even remember now, and I feel badly. I'm going to look up his name as we speak here because he's going to be
Isaiah Bolden.
Isaiah Bolden, thank you. Freaky athlete from Jackson State, and he's probably only going to be a special teams guy. Like he's a kick return option. And with some work could probably be sort of a core kick coverage guy, so like they're so focused on special teams and no tight ends and like a great tight end and both Hunter Henry and Mike Gesicki are their contracts are up after this year. So what's your, you got all these succession plans, like they got all their interior offensive line succession plans with all these interior offensive linemen drafted. If David Andrews, ends up walking away in the next year, if Mike Oweno ends up going somewhere in free agency, you got your, they're different players. Mapu's not the same as Duggar, but you draft Marte Mapu, gives you some like linebacker / safety depth. If Kyle Duggar leaves, it's like, well, you might not have a tight end on your roster next year now. Like this might have been a good year to do the succession plan thing at that position, Bill. So anyway, they decide not to. But I was going to say, in terms of free agents and like realistic moves right now that the draft is passed, running back is a position where there are some names out there that I think would be of interest. And I'm just actually looking right now to make sure that I haven't missed anybody. But Leonard Fournette is a player that I know the Patriots were really interested in bringing aboard 2 off seasons ago. So not this off season,
Oh,
but
yeah, I
last
think I
off
remember,
season. And he
Yeah.
ended up signing a 1-year deal to go back to the Bucs. He actually visited with the Patriots. And what he says, I think it was Fournette who reported this. He said Brady basically got on the horn with him and said, What the hell are you doing up there? Come back to Tampa. And so he re-signed with Tampa.
That's so
So
funny.
I'm sure Bill is saying thanks, Tom, for that one.
Yeah.
But they really liked him because he's a big back who can catch, and he's really truly versatile, which is something that they love about Ramondre Stevenson. He's still available. He's still a free agent right now. I don't know how much money he's looking for. It's always going to be the sticking point, especially with a veteran running back. But that to me would be a position that I would be trying to address because I'm just not sure, who spells Ramondre Stevenson? He was gassed by the end of the year last year, and they had Damian Harris last year. So, like, who's that guy that can take some of the workload off his back? Maybe it's Kevin Harris, I guess. Maybe it's Pierre Strong, I guess. Ty Montgomery is on the roster. James Robinson's on the roster, although Robinson has dealt with a lot of injuries, and he really got no guaranteed money on his contract, which to me is a sign like, okay, this guy is far from a lock to make the roster, even though he's had some success in the league. I think having somebody who can catch it, that can catch it, that you feel pretty good about being able to stay healthy and can give Ramondre Stevenson a blow every once in a while, like that would be valuable. So Melvin Gordon is another name that's available in that running back list. There's some veteran guys that have played real football and had real NFL success that if they're not going to break the bank, to me, it would make some sense to bring one more guy in there.
Yeah, that definitely would be a position that I think if they did get somebody who is proven and established would really help enhance the offense. And obviously, there's a lot of fans who were kind of hating on Mac Jones quite a bit last season, but there were so many factors that went into why Mac wasn't succeeding last year. Matt Patricia being part of that too, as to why he was even calling the offensive plays in the first place. I was a little bit unsure of. And I think having Bill O'Brien there, who is familiar with Mac and his play and is familiar with, how to actually call an offense, I think is going to be huge for him because he can kind of, adapt to Mac's playing style and help cater to him. But you do need to have those pieces around him to allow him to get the ball to somebody, because last season I was like, well, who's he supposed to get the ball to? There's not really a lot of reliable weapons that he has on offense. And how do you succeed in that type of situation?
It's a great point. I mean, not only are you bringing in a new coordinator, but it's a new offense, and it's the new coordinator who's never been a coordinator before, hasn't worked on the offensive side in a long time, is trying to basically draw up the new offense with a new language. And oh, by the way, the same guy is supposed to coach the offensive line, and they're dealing with a new language too. And the offensive line might be the most difficult position outside of quarterback to coach in football. And so you put it all together with the weapons, what you're talking about in terms of who he's supposed to go to, and it feels like a borderline impossible situation. And I really, and maybe I'm a little bit more lenient on him than most, but I think anybody who really holds last year against Mac Jones isn't giving the difficulty of the situation as much credit as it deserves. That was unprecedented. That was not what Trevor Lawrence had to deal with as a rookie. Trevor Lawrence, and I get it, his head coach was a disaster and they booted him almost immediately. The Urban Meyer era, bad deal.
Yeah.
But that was on a cultural level and on a chemistry level. And again, that stuff matters in this sport. And so I don't want to discount the difficulties associated with that. But Trevor Lawrence had 2 longtime NFL experienced offensive coordinators on the offensive staff for the Jaguars. It wasn't like he was sitting in with Urban Meyer and Urban Meyer was the guy drawing up the offense and, not able to provide answers that maybe Trevor Lawrence was looking for on a daily, weekly, week-to-week basis. Like, he had real guys in the offensive meeting room with him that could do those things for him. The football part of it was covered. The culture and that stuff was a mess. But the football stuff, like, Trevor Lawrence had it pretty good last couple of years ago. Tua Tagovailoa is the other example that gets brought up all the time. Well, he had 2 offensive coordinators basically 2 years ago before Mike McDaniel came in. No question. And that was a mess of a situation. That was a disaster. Do you know what the 2 offensive coordinators, you know what their background was in, Gabby? It was in offense.
Yeah.
It wasn't in defense. It wasn't on special teams. Like, at least those guys had coached offense at the NFL level before. Like, what the Patriots were dealing with on that side of the ball was as bad as it seemed, if not worse. And so I look more to the player that Mac Jones was 2 years ago.
Yes.
And when they had a functional offense and when they were, top 10 in some categories across the league with worse weapons than I think what they have now. And I look at this group and I say, okay, it's still not a great group talent-wise, but with the right coordinator and with this quarterback playing at a relatively improved level, what you would expect would be improved off of his rookie year based on just his knowledge of the league and his overall understanding of what his own game is. This has the potential to be a pretty good offense. There's still no true number one. They still aren't, in my opinion, going to be elite. And I think you need to be elite to be championship caliber. But I think they can be good enough to get into the playoffs. I think they can be good enough to win a playoff game. After that, I'm not sure. But, winning a playoff game might be enough to kind of make the owner feel like he should bring everybody back. Quarterback, head coach, offensive coordinator, everybody.
Yeah, I mean, losing Josh McDaniels definitely really, really hurt this team. And you could see visible frustration on Mac's face during games this year, too. You could tell that he just wasn't, feeling like he was able to succeed and he was being provided with the right tools to be able to succeed. And I do think that aspect of it is going to change this upcoming season because, you mentioned this already before. Mac has a really, really high football IQ, and I think he's really aware of what's going on the field. And you could argue that not every quarterback is really up to par like he is in that way. And his knowledge of the game, I think, runs really, really deep. It's just a matter of getting him the talent and the situation that he needs to be able to succeed. And like you said, 2 years ago, he did show glimpses of a quarterback that can be one of those more elite quarterbacks in this league if he's in the right situation. So I'm with you. I'm hoping that they can make the playoffs this year, maybe win a playoff game. What are your kind of expectations for their record? Like, what do you realistically think it'll look like this year?
So I think what's interesting is, again, I believe they've improved. And if you just look at them in a vacuum and say, well, they were an 8-win team last year and they've improved. So how much have they improved? And, I know our guy, my good friend, again, he's the reason I essentially have a job. And so I want to make it clear. I mean, this is not criticism, Gabby, but I think Tom Curran has him as an 11-win team. That to me isn't necessarily accounting for how good some of these other teams have gotten. The Jets, especially, that's the obvious one, right? But, you're also looking at the schedule this year. I think you're seeing more talented, more capable teams on the schedule this year as opposed to last year. You've got the Chiefs on the schedule this year. You have the Raiders, again, with a quarterback who is going to understand the system if he's healthy, and Jimmy Garoppolo, and they should be a better team. It's one of your home games is going to be played in Germany. Like, there's some challenges associated with that. So
that's going to be awesome, though. Maybe you'll get to go to that.
and no doubt. And I'm like hoping, hey, just to make sure I want to go to my boss's office right now. We're definitely making that trip next year, right?
I'm going to go into that game.
Depending on the schedule, sometimes we need an extra body here and need them for the pre and post game. And I love doing that stuff too. Don't get me wrong, but I think I want to go to this Frankfurt game. I
might have to make a trip to Germany for that too.
There you go. Hey, make the most of it, right? Like, it's a great excuse to be like, hey, gotta go. Put it on the podcast account, Gabby.
Right?
Get out there for the trip.
I think I will when I do it.
Yeah. So anyway, I just would say when you look at the schedule and like the number of realistic wins, I've got them at like a 9 or a 10 win team,
Yeah,
and
that's
that might be, listen, 9 wins would have been enough for them to make the playoffs last year. So maybe they are a playoff team. But it's hard to sit here and predict 9 wins and playoffs. Like I think they're going to be right around that area, and they're going to be sniffing it, and they'll be sniffing it late, and they'll be in contention. It's one of the reasons I'm fascinated to see the schedule drop. Like, okay, who might they be having to beat the last couple weeks of the season here in order to get into the postseason? That'll
Yeah,
be a
because it
lot of
could be
fun.
a situation like last year where it really came down to the last week of the regular season and they had to win and they needed a couple other teams to lose. So they did need some help too. But those opponents at the end of the season, the last 2 or 3 weeks could be really, really crucial in terms of, their chances of getting in. Because I do, like you said, think they're going to be one of those bubble teams.
Yeah, and it really, when you are one of those bubble teams, it emphasizes the importance of those games in the middle, or sorry, at the beginning of this. Really, every game's emphasized, right? But
Yeah.
it felt like for years with Tom Brady, you could absorb a 2-2 September. You could be 500 the first week of October, and you knew you were still going to win 11 games and make the playoffs, or you're still going to win 12 games and be the number one seed. Like
Nobody
those
was
days
sure.
are those days are gone. Like you can't screw up early anymore. Like you don't have time to find your footing in that way. Obviously you always want to be playing your best football at the end of the year, but if you're not giving yourself a chance early, that might be the difference between making the playoffs and not. So for guys like Gesicki and Juju Smith-Schuster and anybody else who's new on this roster and sort of getting Christian Gonzalez, put him in the mix too. Those guys are all gonna be ready to go pretty early, because if you lose winnable games, and again, we'll see what the schedule's like, but if you lose, for instance, to the Dolphins, like to me, they should at least be splitting with the Dolphins. And,
Yes.
I don't really believe in the Dolphins. I think the Patriots actually will finish ahead of the Dolphins this year. But if you lose an early Dolphins game, man, that to me is that's a wasted opportunity. If, we know when they're playing the Colts now, the Colts is actually a November game, but when you get to that game in November, in Frankfurt, like you better win that game. That's one of the few that you look at on the schedule and you say right off the bat, okay, rookie quarterback, it's the Colts, they're rebuilding. Like that's a must win if you're going to be a playoff team. So like they all matter, which in some ways is fun, but it's a different kind of fun than when they were winning 12 every year, Gabby.
Yeah, we don't want any repeats of that Bears game from last year,
Right.
which was supposed to be a penciled in automatic win.
Right. Those are the ones you can't screw up. I mean, again, look at that one. Like that's a perfect example. That losing that game kept you out of the playoffs. Now, if
Yep.
you got to the playoffs, you probably would have lost in the wild card round and like shrug your shoulders and whatever.
Yeah.
But it's a different conversation. The whole season, the whole offseason takes on a different tenor, maybe even in ownership's eyes. If at least you get back to the postseason, now you haven't made it 2 out of 3 years and you really, and also ran, and now what does that mean if it happens again this year when these teams have gotten better? Now there's a future Hall of Famer in your division playing quarterback. Like that one game kind of changes the conversation around everything. That's what's great about the NFL. Honestly, being a fan of the NFL, covering the NFL, is that it all matters so much, and you screw up one or two of them, and it completely alters the outlook for everybody.
Yeah, and I think for Mac's confidence too, making the playoffs this year would be huge because he's still at that point where, he's still pretty new in his career. And obviously they made the playoffs a couple of years ago. And then after everything that happened last year and all the frustration that came with last season, I think that could be huge for him if he's able to look back on this upcoming season and say that he took that team to the playoffs again.
No doubt. I think doing whatever you can to improve his confidence level. Not saying that he's not a confident guy, but I think that should be part of the calculus this year is, and that's what I thought should have been part of the calculus this offseason. And again, they just weren't that many opportunities in order, in terms of free agency or the draft to get him that receiving piece that he needed. I was a little surprised they weren't more aggressive to get like a true, no doubt starter on the offensive line. There were a few of those guys available. They went sort of with the like many hands makes light work approach. They went with, numbers over or quantity over quality. And like, in my opinion, they went with Riley Reif and Calvin Anderson and Connor McDermott, and they brought them all back. Where, like, could you have used that money and gotten most of the contract done with, starting tackle X? Maybe not Jawan Taylor, who ended up signing a pretty big deal. But maybe it's Mike McGlinchey, or maybe it's Caleb McGarry. And now you feel like you've got a real solid starter there, and you're going to try to fill in with backups and make sure you have depth because injuries happen. But, that would have maybe helped the quarterback's confidence too. I think the interior should be set. And so for a pocket quarterback like him, who can kind of step up when that edge pressure comes, as long as there is room for him to step up because the interior is good, then maybe that's all he needs to be a confident player next year.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm hoping that they have a better season than they had last year, because it was definitely just a frustrating one to watch, and just many, many emotions that came with watching Patriots games last year. So I'm hoping for, a little bit more of a fun season from them, and being able to show that they can compete with some of these other teams. So it'll definitely be fun for sure. Like you said, a different type of fun than when Brady was here, but hopefully just a fun season for the Patriots with just some new faces and a new person running the offense. So I'm pretty excited for sure. I'm excited for tomorrow just to see when they play everybody, because I think that's going to be really important to kind of gauge, when during the season are they going to have to really, really step it up and win some games.
Yeah, where's the gauntlet, right? That's the conversation every year. Where's the gauntlet, the quote unquote gauntlet? What's that 4 or 5 week stretch that looks like it could make or break their season, right? Like, it's every year we got one of those, and maybe it's this year. Maybe it's, you've got Bills, Jets, Chiefs, back to back to back weeks, and those look like really difficult games now, right? Three of the best quarterbacks in the league. So that'll be a lot of fun when the schedule finally drops, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Well, this was awesome, Phil. I really, really appreciate you joining me and taking the time today. I know, you're really busy and your schedule is really busy, so I truly do appreciate the time.
Gabby, anytime. Great chatting with you. And hopefully the team that shall not be named, and we've done a great job of not naming them.
Yeah.
Hopefully they can give us something to be happy about before we really dive into Patriots offseason stuff. There are some other sports that can make us happy between now and then.
Yeah, they have the potential. So we'll see if what they decide to do tomorrow and what team decides to show up for that game. The team that shows that they're capable of beating anybody and winning the whole team, or winning the whole thing, or the team that just doesn't really put in a lot of effort and just kind of coast through, and people are, scoring 0 points and not contributing. So we'll see what team shows up for that game.
You used a great word there, decides. What do they decide to do? That's giving them ownership. That's giving them the keys to their own future. I think a lot of us are looking at this and saying, well, which team are we going to get, or which team is going to roll it out there? Like, it's up to them. It's up to them. Everything is up to them. So thank you for reminding me of that.
You're welcome. Yeah, it's definitely up to them, and hopefully they make the right decision, and they come out there with their backs against the wall and realize that they are capable of winning, and just show us the team that we know can win. But I hope you have a great rest of your week. I'm sure we'll be staying in contact on social media and everything, but I'll definitely have to get you back on again at some point.
No doubt. Anytime, Gabby. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your week, everybody. Enjoy this awesome New England spring weather that hopefully is here to stay. And I will talk to you all next time. Have a great one, everyone. Take care.